Welcome to What's Left, the weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Libson, and community organizer socialist Kenny Cepeda, and joined by our wonderful teacher and socialist, contributor, writer, and just amazing comrade, AJ. Thank you for joining us, AJ. Let's do a little housekeeping quickly. We're online at what-s-left.webnode.com. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. I'm forgetting to announce, please jot down our information because we don't know if this channel will survive.
It'll be gone probably in about 3 weeks. That's my guess. From YouTube. Right.
Once again, thanks for joining us, AJ. We have decided to do something different for this episode. We had planned something else last week, but Andy had suggested we do this episode instead, which is more of our conversations around reopening schools, conversations around the struggle to fight tech in education and the overtaking of Silicon Valley taking over our public education. And as we are continuing that saga, that conversation, one of our own high school teacher, Andy Libson, our host here on What's Left, has now had an incident involving going back to school, but in a way that's that was outdoors, but as well with the consent of parents. Andy, did you want to fill us in then?
Well, just to say summary, because I think there's a whole story here, is over spring break, we had an in-person teaching, or some of us hosted an in-person teaching event at Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. And we invited some of our students to join us with parent permission. And it looks like Human Resources from the San Francisco Unified School District basically found out that this happened. I'll report how that kind of happened. And this might be being investigated. And so I'm choosing to talk about it because I personally think it's outrageous that a great event that took place, people actually getting to be with students getting to be with each other, see their teacher, would be investigated at a time when they're talking about returning to school. And particularly in our school, the return to school is still going to be about screens and kids not working with each other and teachers not working with students. So we have an inverted set of priorities now in education. And so I felt like this is important to talk about to draw out the fact that, do we really want to go down this road of essentially eliminating in-person education as an experience and almost demonizing it?
So I have a question. So this happened during spring break, you said? So there was no regular school at that time. It was, okay.
Yeah. And, yeah, and maybe AJ could give a little background to how this came about.
Well, I think about 2 weeks before spring break, the group of teachers that Andy and I have sort of informally been meeting with every now and then, and Eduardo's been there, I think, the last couple times as well, sitting on stumps in Golden Gate Park talking about what the heck we think is going on with schools, why we're not back yet, what we can do about it. All the way back in the fall, myself and a couple coworkers were kicking around the idea of what if we just, went to school and tried to teach in the parking lot. What would we do? And that was sort of the beginning of, trying to get some other folks together and some of the actions that we did. But we kind of just put that on the back burner until somebody, new showed up in our little group on that day and said, what would happen if we just, went to the park and just did school? And from there, I think I just kind of reached out to see who would actually want to do this during spring break. And we got together and talked about sort of languaging and how we were going to pitch it to students and families, and really wanted to do it as an opportunity to try to find and bring together families and students who were tired of this isolation and separation and thought we should be back together doing in-person learning. And so, you know, we talked about it to students, and then we contacted all families and, you know, said, this is not a field trip. This is not a school event. It's not happening on a school day. And you are invited, and your families are invited. And that was sort of the birth of the idea. And we ended up on the Monday of spring break with 12.5, maybe 20 at the most, students and families together in the park.
I'll just add that I also was involved in the just minimally, although, but I was in I translated the form, the consent form, and was also in communication with the majority of the Spanish-speaking families that were interested in going. And I'm
my class.
From your class.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so that was a minimal connection to it, but that was my involvement in it. So
how was the turnout of students, you know, compared to your expectations? What do you expect going into this?
I have about 100, I'm teaching about 125 students that are on my roles. A number of those students don't show up to the Zoom classes. So, you know, it's not, I don't think I'm teaching 125 really. And I have 2 mainstream classes and 3 EL classes of 10th grade physics. And what I pitched was basically a chance to do a lab, the lab that I didn't do by Zoom because it would be very depressing, was a circuits lab, basically, where they build circuits, use lights and switches and batteries and an ammeter or a multimeter to measure voltage and things like that, and whiteboards to draw circuit diagrams. And really, I feel like the circuit lab, I usually actually start my year with the circuit lab often because it's so unifying for the students who work on it, particularly in Paris. And it's a lot of fun because you make lights go on and off and you use switches and things like that. So I told them that we were going to do that. And honestly, I actually anticipated more response from my mainstream than from my EL students, but it was completely inverted. I think out of my 2 classes, I think only 2 students showed up who wanted to participate from my mainstream classes, and 9 from my EL classes. And a number of those parents reached out to either Eduardo or a student teacher who I'm working with who actually speaks Chinese. And if they were more comfortable speaking to a person, you know, in their native language, then they could call her, or they were welcome to call me. So that's where the confirmations came. Either some of the parents called me, some called Eduardo, and some called the other student teacher. So that's what I found, at least. And it was interesting to me how many of the EL students really gravitated towards it. Yeah. Oh, and also, there were parents who were saying, "Can my daughter come, who's not a mission student, or, you know, and be part of it?" Things like that. And I was like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah, the setting that I teach in is much different. I'm at an alternative high school and public school, but alternative high school. It's much, much smaller. The program's very different. So we had, I don't teach nearly 150. I had 6 students, I think, there, plus some family members. And there was a lot of overlap between the other teachers involved and me sharing students. And so I had a couple different classes that I pitched it to. And one, I set up we've been studying parabolas in our math class. I set up a tripod and we had a game, toss some bean bags, look at some parabolas, film some parabolas in slow motion. We had some art supplies that other students brought. And for my students who are the students that I advise, I pitched it as a chance to actually connect and do some things together in person. And that was the majority of the students who came were actually not my math students, but were those students that are my junior and senior advisees who just wanted the chance to meet each other in real life and sit in a common place and do some art activities together. I was really happy with the turnout. I'll say there was a few students who were going to come along with families that didn't. So I was there was a few families that I wanted the chance to talk to that I didn't get as far as that like organizing piece of trying to find these family members. But I was just so happy to sit there with them. And, I think we talked before in a previous episode about just when we first got together, how it was strange for us to be back in live space with each other. And I had that conversation with students on that Monday of them actually being able to say, like, I've forgotten how to be around other people. And I feel like I have to learn how to do that again. And I felt that was really important.
Yeah. And what I was surprised, or I was really glad about the turnout. And what I really appreciated was that the students took it very seriously in terms of making sure that a parent contacted me or the student teacher. And even there was one person who I know, Eduardo, you said, like, even as I was showing up, they were like, so-and-so, just got a call from their parent, things like that, which that was a little bit stressful for me, to be honest. And fortunately, I didn't have to deal with the situation of a person who showed up who didn't have a parent who would give him permission. I hadn't thought that through, but that didn't happen, and so it showed that students took it very seriously. And what was really exciting was the number. I think 3 different sets of parents showed up with their kids, and to get to meet them and to see how glad they were about it, that was really neat. And I think after everything was said and done, maybe we'll talk maybe a little bit about the day, but one of the highlights was sitting with the family of one of my students, the mother, the father, 2 daughters, and we just played Jenga, this big Jenga thing. And I'd never played Jenga before. They showed me how to play it, and it was just great. So
I want to add that I don't know all of the teachers of this school district, but I have a good amount of friends on that are teachers, and almost all of them that I'm thinking of have seen their students after hours in some shape, way, or form, whether it be on the weekends, home visits, meeting up with them for ice cream, or at the park, organizing events outside of the city. I mean, I even organized an event with a teacher when I was working at Cesar Chavez Elementary School. We went to the Fitzgerald Reserve, south of San Francisco. And I think that this conversation is really important for any teacher listening to this, because this is scary to think that you got in trouble for something that you got permission from families, and after hours, it was just not on your time at all. And for anybody to take you to the principal's office, as Kenny was saying earlier, is ludicrous, because that would mean that all of the teachers are then implicated. All of the teachers who have been doing this over the pandemic, who have been doing this while schools were closed. I just know teachers who were not ready, to go back to school, and still met their students at parks because they're struggling online. And I know teachers who have really been wanting to go back and have met students after hours. Even some teachers who knew that this whole setup, this whole online learning, distance learning, have met their students in the very beginning of the year to build that relationship so that they could know themselves outside of the online platform before school started. This is scary to think that you are something might happen, or who knows what, right? When it really could affect us all. So that's all I wanted to add to that. I don't know if you think the same, AJ. It's just not, it could, I feel almost if this is almost a targeting Andy, maybe, because of what he stands for and being notorious at his school. And just really saddened by the whole thing, because I think part of being a teacher, being an educator, is to build those relationships with your students. And that relationship is key to success if, we're trying to really support them along their way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can have a lot to say about why I think this is happening and what it might look like. But Andy, can you just update us on details about, or what you want to share about the threats or what's going down?
Well, yeah, I mean, part of me wants to still talk about what happened on
Go
that
on.
day. Yeah, but I'll just say this, like, you know, we also had pizza at the end, right? It was supposed to be pizza in the beginning, but we had a little snafu, and so it was for us pizza at the end. And students asked me, "Is like, well, you know, can we do this again?" You know, and I was like, "I would love to do it again, but I do want to see how this what the response is." You know, and I wasn't like, it's not like I'm completely shocked that there's kind of been a negative response by the district, if you will, to this. But I wanted to see, and what I would say about that is, I think it just should, again, the reason this is important to me is I think teachers who've been meeting with their students have been doing the right thing. I support those things. Obviously, it needs the consent of the parent. That's critical. But I think, particularly if you look at our school, Mission High School, return right now is not really a return towards teachers and classrooms and students. Return is students sitting in little plexiglass bubbles at seats with masks on at computer screens. That is what return means for our and then at the high school level, that means your homeless students, your foster kids, your students with IEPs, and some of our newcomer population, the ones who choose to. This is what they're returning to, which is sort of, to me, it's more like a CDC prison than an actual in-person experience. So our district is rushing towards this sort of experience for our students, and is singling out a teacher who in off hours is actually having a real, what we call school, which is a social experience where the students get to interact with each other and they get to interact with their teacher, and the teacher gets to interact with parents. I mean, like, so that I want to highlight that, because I don't believe this. There's a few reasons it's not an accident, because I do think this world is being turned upside down, because I do think, and this is what I did tell the parents that I talked to, is I am concerned about in-person education going away for the vast majority of students. It's going to be left for the rich and for the most needy. And everyone else is going to ultimately, in 3 to 4 to 5 years, essentially be working through a computer screen of one way, shape, or form in terms of their educational experience, and isolated in some kind of booth as they do it, whether it be drop-in centers, you know, that are monitored, or whether it be at their home. So we have to fight that. And I want to meet parents who are aware of this, or who are being made aware of this. And I think parents and teachers and students are going to have to fight to hold on to this if we're going to. So this was part of why I did this, and I let parents know that. So I'm not surprised at this, because I've been outspoken about wanting to return, and wanting to return in the guise of challenging the health and safety protocols that are being pushed forward here. And I know that's not just not popular among the district, that's not popular among my colleagues. So I wasn't even surprised that people went, like, the way this got reported was students came back from spring break, and some of my students were really excited and said this was the best thing they had happened to them during spring break, and it was like a highlight. And some teachers might have heard it, and one of those teachers went to the principal. I imagine at that point, the principal goes to human resources. I got an email from my principal like by Monday when I came back saying, "Is this true what has happened, that you had a class?" And I said yes and no. Basically, I did meet with students, but it wasn't a class. It was my own personal event, and it had parental permission. And then by Wednesday or Thursday, I was called into the office, asked a series of questions, and then finished off with, well, human resources is going to be investigating this. And the principal is basically the intermediate here. Like, this is about the district and me. So yes, I think I'm being singled out for my beliefs, but I actually think I'm not under attack. I think what's under attack is the notion that teachers should feel safe to interact with their students, and students should feel safe to interact with each other, and that kind of interaction has to be scrutinized and looked under a microscope to see whether that should be done at all. You know, and that's wrong to me. That's completely not safe. That's completely destructive, and we will need to fight that.
when we decided to do this, there was kind of this moment where I felt like I don't know where to go next, because now the conversation has shifted to reopening and schools are going to be open and we're all going back. And so even the very small group of people who were vocally saying schools need to be reopened, that some steam, came out of that. It seemed like the question was being answered. Now I feel like I still have that question. Now we're going back. And it's for less than half the students, right? It's to the conditions that you described, which are going to be the same at my school as well. And particularly at my school, the students who end up at my school have already been chewed up and eaten alive by the public school system. They end up at my school because they have been it's kind of their last chance to find somewhere that they can land to get a diploma when they come there. And to imagine any students, but particularly the students that I work with, coming in to sit in a room isolated and behind a mask and plexiglass to be on a computer screen all day, they will not come, so then we're going to have empty rooms where the students who have been offered a place to come back are not going to come. And I feel like what happened on that day and what you were able to do is remind students and remind families about what it can feel like to work together. And I imagine, when that comes up against what it looks like to go back, I don't know where I find myself asking, like, what do we do now? Like, what are we going to be able to do next? Is this going to be just continually very demoralizing and isolating, which is my suspicion? That's why I think it's really important that you are talking about what happened and the fact that you are being threatened and disciplined for what happened. Because I do think there are lots of people who, like you said, Eduardo, even if they are not ready to return to school, have been finding ways to drop by, do home visits, deliver materials, see people, all that kind of stuff. And I do think that really what is being threatened here is everything. I agree with what you said. And again, another attack on our ability as teachers and educators to decide what happens with our students and what learning should look like, that should be left to software and computers and Silicon Valley and developers now, and that should be even more out of our hands, that we're not to be trusted with that. And in this case, actually, I would imagine, I'm only imagining what they're going to say, but based on my experience with them, that actually you're a danger, right? That you're a danger to students and a danger to families, and not responsible, and a threat to safety with the kind of choices that you made about what to do on that day.
I do want to be clear, though, that while I do think there's intimidation going on here from human resources to say we're looking into this, there's been no disciplinary action at this point. I'm choosing to talk about this before such a thing happens. A union lawyer would advise me not to do this. And I talked to a union ally about this as well, and we can talk more about that. They're willing to help me in terms of getting a lawyer if it need be. But there's a bigger issue here, first of all. And secondly, so even though they haven't made a decision, I want to talk about this nevertheless, because I do think there's an attempt to intimidate teachers to do this, and attempt to railroad us towards this fear and compliance. And I think we need to break out of that. I don't know what sort of consequence HR could come back and say, we looked into this, we don't necessarily like it, but we're not going to do anything about it, but please don't do it again, or something like that. They could give me a verbal reprimand or a written reprimand. I could be suspended. I suppose I could be fired. I haven't heard any of those sorts of things. So there has been no consequences talked about. I'm choosing to, but I do believe that by asking you to come into the principal's office, by asking me a series of questions, then saying HR's looking into this, there was an attempt to intimidate, and I want to act before that. And I want to get ahead of this, because like I told you, AJ, and I've told some of the group of educators, at these moments, this is when they want to put educators on trial. And honestly, I think it's about putting them on trial for what they're doing to education. It's the school district, yes, but this plan is not. This is Gavin Newsom. This is London Breed. This is Silicon Valley. This is Wall Street. This is the entire U.S. ruling class that has this plan towards education. Whether or not you think it's Republicans and Democrats talking about open, everyone, all the ruling classes united on making education more remote because they're looking to make labor more remote. And all that's happening in education is just a follow-to to how they're going to reorganize labor. And I guarantee you that's for profits. And I know the Republican Party is for profits and the Democratic Party is for profits. So there is no split in the ruling class on this project. The only people there to fight it are us. And unfortunately right now, a lot of teachers are following our Democratic Party allies down this rabbit hole of destroying in-person education and turning it into kind of a dystopian Silicon Valley, nightmare.
I mean, I'm not sure if you're allowed to discuss like what was asked, at the meeting with the principal. I'm kind of curious.
The basic questions were, okay, what happened? First of all, principal is very professional. I thought they did the thing right. So I have no problem with how they did it. It's just obviously that I should be called in for this. And I actually look at the district, even though, I think it could have been dealt differently. I think my opponent here is the school district, and so they asked, what happened? What date did it happen? How many students were involved? How did you communicate with the parents? Did the parents communicate back to you? How did you get that? How did you get that information? How did they get that information to you? Because, there was translations involved. Why did you do it? And I told them, because I wanted students to have this in-class experience. I wanted to meet my students. And I told the principal, I think in-person education is at risk and under threat. And I want to build forces that are prepared to defend it. And I even said, I think administrators have a stake in that as well. But, I do think parents, students, and teachers need to begin to figure out how we're going to organize to defend the idea that education is a communal experience and a social experience. And then they also asked a question about were there other ideas you had? Because I've been outspoken at my school about wanting to return way back in August, about having problems with testing and things like that, the contact tracing and things like that. So I basically said, well, mostly about I said yes, the issue of the end of public education as we know it. I'm very concerned about that, and so that did partially animate my actions. And other than that, they were like, well, thank you, essentially. I think my principal had their own feelings about what I did. I wouldn't say that they didn't make it overt to me that they were against or for it. They also asked me, do I know the codes? Do I know what the rules are about teachers in-person education right now? And I said, yes, I do. I know that we are not to be going back into the building during school hours to be teaching students. And I did not do that. So, and I did not consider this a school event. So, and then they told me at the end, well, we'll get back to you because, this is out of the principal's hands, really. This is now in HR's hands. And so now we'll wait, or at least I'll find out if they're going to either do nothing or do something, but I'm not going to sit and wait and let them decide my fate. I'm going to put them on the hot seat. And that, again, I did eventually, I've spoken to some media. One of those people from the media, from a mission local, contacted the union and said, hey, we heard about this, and then my union called me and was like, what's going on here? And they were concerned, but they'll provide me with a lawyer. And I'm open to definitely, I'd like to retain a lawyer if I need one. So I appreciate that. But they said, we would advise you not to say anything. And I said, I'm going to say something. I'm not going to agree with that. I don't think there's much reason to talk to a lawyer right now because mostly a lawyer is going to tell me to shut up, and I'm not going to do that. So, and it's not because I don't want to shut up. It's there's a reason to do this. We have to get out. We have to get that idea out to people and get them to understand that the little intimidation they're doing with me, and maybe it's going to be a lot of intimidation. Maybe they're going to bring down the suspension. Maybe they'll even threaten to fire me. I don't know. But we have to understand that this is the situation that whatever I'm facing is the situation all of us teachers are facing if we should choose to get outside of our health and safety mandates that restrict how we can interact with our students and how they can interact with each other, and what they'll do if we dare to challenge that notion. I didn't do anything. I didn't challenge the health and safety notions. I just went and did it in Golden Gate Park. But they understand. Like, I do think we need to get back in person, and I don't think it's going to help us to do this under the regime of 6 feet of distance. Don't touch each other. Don't be near each other. Don't work with each other. That to me is not school.
Have you talked to other coworkers or other teachers, and what have other people's responses been?
I only talked to one colleague so far, and they were like, "That sounded great." They saw me afterwards, and they were like, I haven't seen you. You seem a lot happier, actually. There's other things going on that have made me happier, but this was a definite shot in the arm for me about reminding me about why I thought teaching was worth doing, as it is, even under capitalism. And so it's only one other teacher from Mission who I've really talked with about that. I have not gotten, again, most of my staff. There are other staff members who've said that they want to return, but most of them have been like, they don't want to be in my situation. They certainly don't really want to talk to me about the stuff I'm talking about, because it just feels too hot for them. And then there's other people who just think like, you're wrong for even raising this, and you're dangerous for even saying some of these things. So I have not seen necessarily my colleagues at school. I'm not sure they would be my best allies at this moment. So I haven't really spoken to too many of them about it.
One of the mothers called me yesterday and said, "Who ratted out?" Which teacher said? She spoke to me in Spanish, and she said, "Who was it? Which teacher told the principal?" I mean, how else did the principal know, right? By another teacher. I'm wondering, just that was the parents' response. But I'm wondering, why would a teacher, I mean, this is maybe a rhetorical question. Why would a teacher go to the principal if, like I said, teachers see their students after hours? I mean,
I can think of two reasons. One would be because Andy is outspoken about a lot of things that people don't agree with necessarily. But in general, I would say that our working class organization is so pathetic and pitiful and low that that's in my experience in schools, that's what people do. They go to the authority. We don't have experience like working conflicts out together collaboratively. We don't have spaces for that to happen, and we don't have a lot of experience doing it. So despite maybe the particulars of Andy's situation in general, I see it all the time as going to the principal as like the authority figure to mediate conflict between workers.
Yeah, and all I would add is those sorts of things were going on before, but they're going to happen a lot more going forward, because the environment we're experiencing now politically, Eduardo and Kenny, we haven't talked much about this. Even this issue of censorship, which we talk about, Google censoring you and Facebook censoring you. Now regular people are censoring one another. Admins on Facebook groups and things like that censoring people, and we are essentially right now being turned into a kind of working class that China has with its social credit system. Like, this is sort of its pre-state, which is basically a social credit system, with your phone, is a giant snitch network. And I believe that the groundwork is being laid for that kind of thing, under the guise of safety, under the guise of we have to be all collectively safe. But what is essentially creating is a situation where people are willing to tell authorities, about somebody else based on their behavior, and not address them or try to work it out there. And they're going to use the guise of like the fact that we have a pandemic and it's not safe. So I have to do that, and I have to keep us safe by telling the authorities about these individuals. So that is the environment we're stepping into. And so I think the likelihood of this kind of stuff happening in the future is not just in schools, but in all workplaces and all throughout the communities, these communities, is very high. And it's very dangerous and very damaging and very destructive, again, for working class solidarity and collectivity. So it works great for the capitalists, but it's going to be very damaging to our cause.
It makes me think of a police state, and in that you don't have to have a cop at every corner if you feel you're being watched all the time. It's like the panopticon type of thing. And like I hear you on this because it doesn't just happen it happens on my work site too. Like where there is public shaming. For example, if you don't have the vaccine, making a list as to who has gotten the vaccine and who hasn't, or who has gotten tested and who hasn't, and then calling people certain names. And obviously, you don't want to be the target. Most people don't. Most people want to be part of something. But if you're being called an anti-vaxxer or a irresponsible person, that creates unempowered people. I just think of growing up in my country, in Guatemala, which faced a lot of repression as a result of the dictatorships that were implanted there. And like the social psychology is way different than Nicaragua, who had a semi-successful revolution. And you can see like the complete opposite, like social psychology, where people like Nicaraguan people are more willing to speak up and not like take shit from people, versus Guatemalans that we've learned to stay quiet and not be nosy and just get in line, because there are consequences to that. And so that, I think, is the risk of all this, of not having conversations, and it just creates unempowered people that just fall in line. And it's scary. It's scary.
I've been thinking about, it seems like there's not too far of a jump between the kind of, inquisition that goes on everywhere I go now about whether or not I've been vaccinated yet or not. And like somebody having an app on their phone to be able to say that, go through your contact list and say who has been vaccinated or not. It doesn't, I'm afraid about the cycle that creates, like you're talking about, Kenny, like this cycle of silence and not wanting to take action, or not wanting to be the head on the nail that sticks out, or, all that kind of stuff. If I think about, we were talking a little bit before we started I was saying, potentially Andy might be able to go back to school this year. I don't think my chances of that are very good. I'm feeling very jealous about not being able to get back in a building, but I know that if I did that, I would not be able to do this hub thing. And I know that what I would have to do is say, I'm not going to do it, and try to get all those teachers whose kids are stuck in my room supposedly on a computer and tell them, like, I'm not doing this with your students. So can we please work together on this? Like, I'm going to be doing activities in the classroom with real people. And, I can imagine, trying to do that and getting a lot of resistance. I can already hear sort of the things that people would say about the health and safety protocols, about the importance of, sticking in line with the curriculum or whatever, finishing out what they think they're teaching this year. I could already sort of anticipate both like an excitement about like that would be a possibility to kind of put some other idea forward about how things could look, but also just a real trepidation about the amount of fear that has already sunk in to our class as a whole, to my coworkers. I've been thinking about that a lot, like what that might look like if this actual return does happen at my site in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we may have to have a reprise episode because I may be returning to the school. I'm on the list too, but it hasn't been confirmed. And I'm being asked, essentially, I think if I'm going to be asked to return, I'll be asked to be in a room with essentially maximum of 14 students. They will never leave that room. I won't leave the room. And they're just going to be on their screens with the classes. And in the case of newcomers, I think we're going to try to figure out how to offer them one legitimate English class, that would actually be like class where you talk to students and talk to a teacher in person. but everything else was just being a monitor there. I can't really agree to that. So that's going to be interesting. Like that may be another episode if that comes. I have some ideas on how I want to deal with that, but it's very similar to what AJ's talking about, trying to work out a situation where I'm essentially an elementary school teacher for about 1 month, with 14 students, and I'm teaching them whatever we're going to learn: English, math, science, and some other stuff. And whatever we want to do for that. And then just going out and like getting used to seeing each other, frankly, and going outside sometimes, whatever. But that's what I would want to do, and that's what I would propose to do. I'm going to see what kind of resistance. I think there will be the health and safety stuff, but then there's just going to be the entire apparatus of how school is working that everyone's so adhering to. So that, we can't do that because, all those students are already in other classes and blah, blah, blah. And I honestly think that doesn't matter. It certainly doesn't matter to me. If one of my students, like if I'm staying remote and I hear one of my students is getting an in-person experience, I'm releasing that student. I'm like, do that, your grade is taken care of for me, and you just go do something that's real. And that's how I would feel. So that's what I'm going to hope. If I'm faced with that, I'm going to be reaching out to my colleagues and saying, look, I really think you should just let me take these kids and have them be in school, not be in, like I said, CDC prison.
This is why I think I would like for families to really advocate for their students, their kids, to say and support. I don't want to be online the entire time. I want an alternative. Really pressure schools and the district that this is not what you want for your kid. I mean, tomorrow is the first day of school for my nephew, and we made it very clear to administration, to the teacher, and I know it's causing some challenges, but this was also before the pandemic happened. I mean, this is something we've always wanted. We knew, we just didn't. We started seeing there's a slow shift ever since I've left elementary school towards more tech and more screening, more tabletas, more like any iPad form or other Google form of screens. And so I really do think that families should also start advocating, speaking up. And they should say, I don't want that. I want something else. What do you want? We have to figure it out together. We have to figure out something else because this is not going to work for me. And opt out. I mean, we may have differences here, Andy, where what is the approach? What's the next thing for us? For me, it's really right now, it's like gathering that support, looking for that support. And I'm going to start it at my school site where I may be revealing right now before the administration knows, but just families getting together and saying, we don't want this at all. Not even for homework, not supplementary. We don't want it. No. So I just wanted to add that as you were speaking, because I think families should get involved.
It makes me want to ask you too, Andy, about your experience talking to families before the Monday in the Park and after, because every student that I had that was interested in coming, I was not difficult conversation with their families to talk. Once I told them where we were going to be, what we were going to do, there was not this fear or resistance from families at all. I didn't have any say no whose students said that they wanted to come. Everybody that I talked to, which was all of the parents of all the students, said yes. And so I wonder, that's another reason I think it's so important that you're not waiting in terms of what's going to happen with HR, and that families are knowing this is going to happen, because what they are going to be invited to send their students back to is not what they want for their kids. And so what kind of family conversations have you had post Monday in the Park?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked to 3 families before, and then I've now talked to two families after. Same people basically. And before it was like, they were just like, yeah, this sounds great. I just wanted to tell you, they were prepared just to tell me by text. And I think one person did. I wanted to see it. I thought they might have more questions. And frankly, there were no questions of like, well, the safety questions. I kind of expected some, and I didn't get any. That's the first thing. And my student teacher reported very simple, not much that parents needed to know. They just wanted to know, like, could they bring something? Do they need to bring something? Do they need to bring materials of any sort? And we were saying no. Then they were like, okay, great. And can other people come? I think was one of the big things. Like, can my daughter come? Can I have some other people who might want to come? Can we come? Can they come? I said it was just a matter of how much materials I have. So that was beforehand. And Eduardo, maybe you can say about your conversations as well. I would say after, it's been very supportive. It's been like, what can we do? How can we help? Yes, we'll write a letter if we need to, or help you get to meetings and things like that. So parents have been very, like, they did not necessarily sign on for that second part of having to deal with drama, but they've been definitely willing to do such a thing. And again, I wish our teachers were as outspoken and willing to just stand up for these sorts of things. But unfortunately, I think a lot of teachers are kind of confused about what's going on as well. So that's what I would say is, like, it's been almost pretty much full support from the parents who were involved.
I can just say that I got texts, but one parent called me specifically. She just called me, and she she was, as it usually happens when you're Latinos start talking about your life, and she was telling me a lot of details of her life. And I was, it was kind of just even getting me a little bit emotional thinking about her struggles she was sharing. I'll just share, like, briefly. If she just said that it's been really hard. It's been really, really tough. She's got other kids. She's got to give attention to her adolescents at home, and they're having friction between parent and adolescent, and that's normal at this age. What is challenging is for her is going to work, leaving her kids at home, and also trying to educate them, and also kind of give some freedom to her teen to be able to go up. But she's also quite reserved, right? Because she doesn't know where they're going or what's going on, and she's occupied. And so this opportunity presents itself, and she was very grateful. She just was like, this is wonderful. This is what my kid needs. This is exactly what we're looking for. She's done. She's zoomed out. She's and she doesn't want to be on. She's bored, and she's lost interest in school. And so I said, and I'm saying all this, I can say this much because I asked her if she wanted to go public saying any of this, because I have a connection to some media. And so I said to her she should share all of this, and she should talk about this. And so I connected her to people, some folks in the media, and so she's going to share that. She's going to share just that. So my point being is, then you get in trouble for it, and she calls me up, and she's just like, what do I need to do? I need to support, because this is not right. And this was supposed to be something like all the teachers are going to be afraid from now on to do this. So that's the response, right? That's post this experience, that now even families are feeling like maybe we shouldn't do this now, right? Because this might have repercussions for the teacher, and we don't want that, even though it's best for our kids, whatever. And this isn't a person who's like, who's saying that COVID doesn't exist or any sort of, like, this is a person who's very mindful of the precautions as well.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that that's what's at stake here too for the families, right? Like, who decides what is safe for their kids? And it's just interesting to hear that there weren't many questions at the beginning, and I think unfortunately, a lot of times parents, especially immigrant parents, may get dismissed, as maybe ignorant, or that's kind of my concern, as not knowing what's best for their kids. But, like you said, Eduardo, even this person who is concerned about the virus understands the importance of their kids socializing. Even, my mom is aware of the situation Libson, and she's disgusted, as a mother. She understands that she's concerned about, she puts herself in that situation, and she's, she would be there fighting, to get me back in school in person. But and I can only hope that more parents, kind of hear this and are encouraged and not intimidated by authorities. And I know I have a coworker who has gone to work with counselors at school because they have been condescending to her. But I get hope because she fights back, even though she sometimes deflects to people with authority. She knows what's best for her kids, and she knows her kids. And I can only hope that more parents, join the fight, because it's kind of obvious where most teachers are on this, unfortunately. So I find it encouraging that Eduardo, you're organizing with some parents too.
What was the other thing we had discussed, Andy, was what? So you cannot meet with any SFUSD family? Was that what it's going to mean? So you potentially cannot even have a lesson with my nephew because he's an SFUSD student.
Right.
So
as long as they're outside of SFUSD, maybe it's fine then. More private school kids will get in-person education, but definitely not public school.
It's just, where do you draw the line, right? I mean, we've said it often enough in this one episode that you got parental consent and you did it after hours, and so I just, so I really do think teachers should.
The lines are being drawn around us very in dark. Like we're being put in a little pen, individual pens, and we either are going to press up against those pens or we're going to accept it. And if teachers think that accepting these pens, these little pens we're being put in, you can go and teach about social justice or fighting racism, or, I mean, it was absurd before when we weren't going on strike and talking about social justice. Now it's getting now it's just completely backwards. It's like we as teachers are teaching only one thing: compliance, fear, conformity, do as you're told. Those are the lessons you will learn in public school in the coming years, unless we as teachers start fighting back against what is being constructed.
That's why I think there's a very interesting, teetering point to make a big issue out of this for the district to decide if they want to make a big issue out of this or not, because of what you said at the beginning, Andy, of in the conversation of schools are reopening, yay, we're all going back to school, and we're doing this because we're so concerned about students that we're now making sure that our students who most need to go back get to go back first. And all of this, is this the thing that you want to make a fight out of, which is actually having in-person education? On the one hand, yeah, I think they do want to smack down the teachers and tell us that we're going to do it exactly the way that they say. But on the other hand, there have been many instances of them looking like fools and being embarrassed, as they should have been at numerous times in the press and amongst working families in the city, for how they've handled this school year. And so whether or not they decide which way they go on that, I do think has a lot to do with what parents they hear from of your kids that were there, how many parents they hear from, and how public of a fight it can be, and that you're willing to make it, which is important.
I do hope any teacher listening to this doesn't get distracted by Andy. When meaning, this is their fight too. And whether they agree with Andy or AJ, for that matter, or not, any teacher listening to this has a stake in this. This is our education, it's our public education. This is your time after hours. This is I know many teachers that get upset by administrators that say they're being micromanaged. This is all the forms of micromanaging, any form of managing that you should be fighting against. And you should also be there to support your students, and to know that if your students want this and you want this, and you're meeting after hours and you're doing all the things that everything right, you should fight for that. I mean, all teachers should be uniting behind that. But sometimes I fear people will get distracted by their disagreements, and specifically on the things that you've been outspoken about, Andy. And this is something that we should be united around.
Yeah. And on a personal level, it is stressful. I do have fear about it. Me and Brandy are getting married in October, and it would be kind of, if something big came of this in terms of a punishment, it could be really upset that apple cart, and so I fear about that. I think there's no way to deal with this by just trying to stay within yourself about it and just trying to stay safe by staying quiet. I don't think that works, and there is a larger issue that I do want to draw attention to, and I do hope that that HR looks at it and been like, and just kind of says, yes, we heard about it. We don't think it's the best idea, but you contacted parents, blah blah blah, and they leave it alone. That's what I hope happens. And
I also think that there is something else here, kind of obvious to me at least, that it's kind of exposing the fact that your work environment is not a democracy; it's a dictatorship. And that's also what you're fighting against, as teachers in that environment, in this context, in this potentially punitive action, is that you don't really have self-determination in democracy, and so can't teach democracy while working in a dictatorship.
I don't have anything else to add.
I think that's mostly it for me. I don't know, AJ, if you have any final thoughts.
It was a great day. I would love to.
It was.
It was really good. It was so fun.
And I definitely don't regret doing it. I would do it again. So let me be clear about that. And I let the parents I've talked to know that, and I let the students know I would do that again. We won't meet with those students next week or anything like that. But I would definitely do circuits in the park again.
All right. So that's it. Thank you, AJ, again for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, and do you think next week, this doesn't have to be on, but that we might be having an interview with some of the people you've been organizing with, some of the family members who are wanting to return to school?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That would be really cool. I think the families that I'm working with are the very specific group of families that I'm working with are very different and radical in their own right, in their own way, because they're very democratically, collectively deciding things together, and they've been really outspoken on this reopening of school. So I hope that people can look at that episode. That will be enlightening, also interesting from a different point of view, from families' point of view, because we've mostly been talking mostly from teachers' point of view, more from Andy. So I think that we'll have a different perspective. What's Left is a weekly political podcast as channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything that you've heard here, please write this down. Share your favorite episode, rate, review. Subscribe to any of these 8 platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, LBRY, 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 and Odysee, Odysee, or YouTube for now. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Andy Libson and Kenny Cepeda. And AJ, thank you. We'll see you all next time. Ciao.